am Dr. Devdutt Changadkar, CEO Saraswati Infotech Private Limited. In my last session, I have covered credit risk and operational risks. In fact, banks are confronted with different kinds of risks. But as per the Basel Accord, three risks have been identified as the major risks: credit risk, market risk, and operational risk. In the last session, I have covered credit risk and operational risk. In this session, I will cover market risk. And in market risks, there are two important risks which I will address. One is the interest rate risk and second is the liquidity risk. I will highlight other risks which are also included in the market risk. Before I start with market risk, I would give a reference of two important cases that happened in the past, which would talk about the importance of market risk. Credit risk, operational risk, and market risks. There is a bit similarity as well as a dissimilarity. As far as credit risk is concerned, the exposure of the bank to a customer is important. Exposure, you are aware, is a balance in the loan account or the cash credit account or the off balance sheet exposures which are getting converted into forced loans. As far as operational risk is concerned, the exposure is to the transactions. So the transactions that are happening in the accounts of the customers in various forms, through branch, through electronic channels such as internet banking, mobile banking, ATM, RTGS, NEFT, electronic credit services, ECS debit or ECS credit, all Aadhaar enabled payments. So the transactions are flowing into the accounts from different forms, and all these transactions pose operational risk as far as bank is concerned. In respect of market risk, you would find that there is a subtle difference. The market risk is slightly different from credit risk and operational risk. In respect of credit risk and operational risk, with certain precautions, you can succeed in mitigating those risks. But in case of market risk, these risks, market risk is dependent mainly on the external factors and to a limited extent on the internal factors. Since it is dependent on the external factors and external factors are not within your control, it is very difficult to mitigate the market risk. Before I start with the market risk, its concept as such, I would highlight two important cases that have happened in the past, one at a country level and another at a bank level. First, the market risk that happened at a country level. In case of Thailand, Southeast Asian crisis, which you may be aware of, that happened somewhere around 1995. Southeast Asian crisis started off in Thailand when its debt exceeded a particular limit. The country was not in a position to repay the external debt which it had borrowed from various countries, and its local currencies started depleting. Because of Thailand's crisis, it impacted neighboring countries like South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Hong Kong as well. Now, the three important factors were involved in this particular case. One, substantial debt. Second, the dependence of the entire economy on the exports. And third, the change in the interest rates in other countries which impacted the competence of or competitiveness of Thailand and other neighboring countries, and they were severely impacted. Second case is about the Barings Bank. Barings Bank was the oldest bank from UK. It was established somewhere in 1881. This bank opened its office in Singapore, and that office was headed by one treasury guy called Lesson, Mr. Lesson. He initially started dealing in derivatives of the indexes, Singapore indexes. In India, we are aware of NSE or BSE. Similarly, two such indexes were there in Singapore, and he was indulging in the derivatives of those indexes. As a situation was reached wherein he could not control certain of the dealings that he had done and which he had to hide, he reached to a level where the entire bank collapsed. The bank became bankrupt. The learnings in this case were, as long as things were going great, he was earning profit for the bank, nobody bothered what risk factors he has been overlooking, and how that bank was brought to an halt. Having said these two cases, now we will go in greater detail about the market risk. Market risk is defined as the risk of losses in on-balance sheet and off-balance sheet positions arising from movements in market prices. Now, what are these market risk positions? The market risk positions can be either related to instruments such as equities in the trading books and the foreign exchange risk, which is including the open position. Now I will talk about the different types of market risks. I have grouped these market risks mainly into two classes: systemic risks and non-systemic risks. Why I have classified these market risk into these two categories? It is because the risks which are systemic risks means they are driven by the entire system at a macro level, not only within the economy but worldwide, as all the economies are integrated with one another because of globalization, liberalization and privatization. Now here, in case of systemic risks, there is a little scope for a bank or for an individual to diversify his risk so that he can minimize the risk, mitigate the risk. Because it is systemic in nature, there is very little scope for him to mitigate the risk, and hence it is a systemic risk. Non-systemic risk, here it is not dependent on macro factors, but it is dependent on micro factors, that is a given individual unit or a particular industry, where if that particular industry is taken care of, then you can minimize the risk. What are the various types of systemic risks? One is the interest rate risk, second is country risk, third is liquidity risk, fourth is currency risk, fifth is inflation risk. Now I will try to elaborate each of these risks in greater detail so that you would appreciate its impact on the bank's balance sheet. Interest rate risk. Now banks are confronted with changes in the interest rates. Now banks are accepting deposits on which they are paying interest. They are receiving funds by way of borrowings either from the call money market or from Reserve Bank of India or from such other short-term sources on which they have to pay the interest. Similarly, on the asset side, they are receiving interest on their loans and advances portfolio. They are receiving interest on the investments in which they have put in funds. So, the interest is playing a major factor both on the asset side and on the liability side. These interest rates, as far as India is concerned, because of the deregulation, are now driven by the market forces. Gone are the days when these interest rates were decided by Reserve Bank of India and when we were in a highly regulated regime. Now most of these rates are deregulated. The last one was the saving interest rates, because of which the entire balance sheet is exposed to the market forces, where the interest rates are determined by the demand and supply forces. They are determined, and in the demand and supply is in turn determined by whole of factors. Second is the country risk. Now the country risk is dependent upon the socio-political factors that are prevailing in that particular country. So the countries like Russia or China, where the communism prevails, dictatorship prevails, the socio-economic factors would be totally different from the factors that are prevailing in democratically led countries like USA or UK, or for that matter India. So depending on these factors, the country risk is also measured by all the banks across the globe for estimating the risks involved whenever they are taking exposures on a particular given country. Third is the liquidity risk. Now you are aware, banks, the peculiarity of a bank is that we are accepting deposits. Corporates are also accepting deposits. So what is the difference between our acceptance of deposits and the acceptance of deposits by the corporate segment? Our acceptance of deposit is typical in as much as, in respect of deposits accepted by the banks, the deposits are always payable on demand. Now in this case, the most important factor about the deposits is that in respect of current and savings deposits, they are always payable on demand. And in case of term deposits, though we call it as term deposits payable as on the date of maturity, but they too have an embedded option which enables the depositor to call for before maturity payment. Now when banks are accepting deposits, they are accepting it for the purpose of lending and or investment. So they have to generate a revenue from the deposits so accepted, so that they can pay interest on the deposits, and they can also pay interest on the borrowings, and they can pay a good dividends to the shareholders, stakeholders of the bank. Now if the funds are to be deployed, and at the same time they have to ensure that as and when demanded by the depositor, those funds should be made available to the depositors. So they are on a twin razor shaped platform, wherein they have to earn on the funds so raised, and at the same time they have to ensure that those deposits are always liquid, available to the depositor as and when he needs it. So from that perspective, you can understand banks are exposed to the liquidity risk. They have to make the funds available to the depositor as and when they are needed, and to make the funds available, they should be in a position to liquidate their investments or their loans into cash, so that they can meet the demand of the depositors. And from that perspective, banks have a liquidity risk. Currency risk. Yes, it is true that as far as cooperative banks are concerned, which are mostly local in character, they might not be exposed to currency risk because of non-funding or non-financing of export limits or import limits to their borrowers for financing export of goods or import of goods. But of late, many cooperative banks have received permission for doing foreign exchange business. And naturally, when they are into foreign exchange business, they are providing trade finance for the purposes of import and export. And when they are providing finance for the purposes of import and export, naturally they are exposed to currency risk. What I mean by currency risk is the fluctuation in the exchange rates. Rupee versus dollar, rupee versus pound, rupee versus Japanese yen. Now that rate is continuously fluctuating. At a gross level, I can say it is the demand and supply force that is determining the exchange rate. But apart from the demand and supply, the demand and supply is also in turn driven by other macro level factors, socio-political factors, war-like conditions in the economy, changes, political turmoil in the respective countries, all are impacting the exchange rates. Of late, you would be aware that the exchange rates in India, which were stable at around 64 rupees per dollar, have moved to 69 rupees because of the substantial rise in oil prices, and the major component of our imports is oil, and because of which the rupee is getting depreciated to a high level. Now such kind of currency risks banks will also be exposed to. Inflation risk. Now again, when I say about inflation risk, inflation is because of the changes in prices, either the wholesale prices or the consumer prices. In the recent past, we have moved to calculating of inflation based on the movement in consumer prices. So the consumer prices is impacting changes in the inflation, and that inflation reduces the value of rupee or the capacity of a rupee to give certain units of goods and services. So that inflation risk is also a risk with which the banks are confronted with. And what is the non-systemic risk? In case of market risk, I have included one particular risk, that is a credit risk is a non-systemic risk. Now I would exemplify it. If a bank is investing in a commercial paper is floated by a corporate. Now that commercial paper has an inherent risk of being defaulted by that particular corporate because of their internal factors. Now to mitigate such risks, usually what banks do, they ensure that AAA rated bonds or AAA rated commercial papers are only accepted for the purposes of investment. I have explained interest rate risk by highlighting its importance in respect of bank's balance sheet, both on the asset side and on the liability side. Now, what I want to say about the interest rate risk is, because of the changes in the interest rates, it impacts the profitability. Because you are aware, interest received and interest paid, the difference between the two is the gross margin that the banks are earning. And if there is change in the interest rates, either on the deposit front or on the advances and investment front, it can impact your gross margin, it can impact your gross profitability. In case of cooperative banks, 95% or more than 95% of the income is coming from interest, net interest margin only, and hence for the banks in the cooperative sector, interest rate risk is of great importance. Now I would further elaborate interest rate risk, and for that purpose I would classify interest rate risks into three categories, rather four categories. One is the term structure risk. Now what is meant by the term structure risk? Now you are aware banks are accepting deposits in the form of savings, current and term deposits. Now when we are accepting deposits in these three forms, you are also aware savings and current deposits are deposits which are payable on demand, but the term deposits are payable at maturity. So depending on the period for which you are accepting the deposits, these term deposits are repayable at the date of maturity. The term deposits would be payable say after 1 year, after 2 years, after 3 years. Nowadays, most of the banks are offering deposits say for 3 years. From 1 to 3 years, gone are the days when you used to have deposits for 7 years, 10 years. So, the liability side of the balance sheet, as far as banks are concerned, represent the sources which are of a short-term nature. And on the asset side, if you come, you have assets of various types. In case of investments, you are investing in government securities. As far as government securities investments are concerned, and if those investments are in excess of SLR requirement, naturally those are most liquid investments which you can encash it by selling it in the open market. But as far as loans and advances are concerned, we are giving loans either in the form of cash credit or in the form of term loan or in the form of bill discounting. Now cash credit and bill discounting, we call it as a short-term advances. They are renewable every year, so they are short-term in nature. But the term loans, they are repayable after 5 years, after 7 years. When we are lending to the industry, in certain cases, we are giving a period of 7 years. And when we are giving housing loans, we are giving a period of 15 years. And nowadays, Reserve Bank also has allowed 20 years repayment period in case of housing loans. So you can understand the mismatch between the sources and uses. You are accepting the deposits where they are repayable mostly within 3 years, and you are lending where you are getting funds over a period of 15 years, 20 years. Now, why this term period is important? If the deposits are accepted for a period of 3 years, after 3 years, the interest rates would be different. So, if you are committed to a deposit at 8%, after 3 years, it can be either 9% or it can be 7%. But the loan which I have given at 9% today for 15 years, and if it is fixed, then naturally you can imagine its impact on the profitability of the bank. While your interest rates, payments are getting repriced after every 3 years, your recoveries or receipts in the form of interest revenue, they are not getting repriced. And when they are not getting repriced, naturally the net interest margin is getting crunched, is getting reduced. And hence, from that perspective, this interest rate risk, that is term structure risk. Second is the basis risk. What is this basis risk? After 2000, in banking industry, Reserve Bank started asking banks to define a prime lending rate, PLR. Now, this prime lending rate is the rate at which you can lend loans to your prime borrowers. Having defined prime lending rate, we started to structure the rates of interest for all class of borrowers by charging over and above the prime lending rate. So, prime lending rate plus 1, prime lending rate plus 2, plus 3. Now, these prime lending rates, so you can see certain portion of your advances are linked to the prime lending rate. Come to the deposit side, and on the deposit side, you would find that you are deciding the interest rates on deposits based on the market forces. What are these market forces? Market forces are taking note of the inflation in the economy. Who is taking note of inflation in the economy? It is naturally the Reserve Bank of India. What inflation? How Reserve Bank of India is responding to the changes in inflation? By changing the what you can say, the policy rates. What are those policy rates? It can be repo rate, reverse repo rate, or the bank rate. So in the recent 1 month before, Reserve Bank of India has reviewed the repo rate and reverse repo rate by increasing it upward by 25 basis points. So now it is 6.25 repo rate and 6.5 reverse repo rate. Earlier it was 6% and 6.25%. So when the interest rates are raised, naturally the interest rates on deposits are also to be raised. So you can see the basis on which the deposits rates are decided and the basis on which the loans are decided are two different bases. Because of the two different bases, and if these two bases are not coinciding with same rate, it can have impact on your interest margins. So from that perspective, this basis rate is also important. Third is the options risk. Now what is this options risk? In case of deposits, in the beginning I said, whenever you are accepting deposits, they are always payable on demand. But in case of term deposits, usually they are repayable on the due date. So you should be relaxed that till due date you are not supposed to make the payment. That is true in case of corporate deposits. In case of bank deposits, we are giving an embedded option. What is that embedded option? It is entitling the depositor to claim that payment even before the due date, that is before maturity. If he asks for the payment, we have to make the payment. So this embedded option goes against you when substantial demand is made by the depositors using that embedded option, and if that demand is made, naturally you will have to make the payment. But on the advances side, you do not have that particular option of asking for the prepayment. This is one thing. Second important thing is, in case of term deposits, our interest rates are fixed up to the date of maturity. But in case of loan rates, they are variable rates as well as fixed rates. And again, if your deposit rates are fixed and the loan rates are variable, then naturally because of this mismatch, there would be strain on your interest margin, and which in turn can impact your profitability. I have explained in option risk itself, that is the same thing, that prepayment and extension risk. While the depositor is entitled to ask for the prepayment, the borrowers might ask for the extension. He might say that I am not in a position to repay the loan as scheduled by you, and hence kindly give me an extension of time so that I would be in a position to meet your commitments. So here again there is a mismatch, and these mismatches also can have an impact on my margins, and that is why I have grouped it under the head interest rate risks. Now how do I measure the interest rate risk? Because in risk management we always talk about three things. One is identification. You should be in a position to identify the risk. Having identified the risk, you should measure it, and having measured the risk, you should mitigate the risk. So keeping that flow in mind, again about the interest rate risk, I would talk about the measures that would help you to measure the interest rate risk. The one such source is a gap analysis. You are aware, under asset liability management, Reserve Bank of India requires banks to prepare on a monthly basis interest sensitivity statement. What is that interest sensitivity statement? It groups all your assets and liabilities into interest sensitive assets and interest sensitive liabilities in various buckets. These buckets are from 1 month to 3 months to 6 months to 1 year and 1 year and above. So your assets and liabilities which are sensitive to the interest rates, those are grouped together, and you find out risk sensitive asset and risk sensitive liabilities. If risk sensitive assets are more than risk sensitive liabilities, what is its impact on your interest rate margin when the interest rates are rising? Naturally, the bank's profitability would improve. But if the risk sensitive assets are less than the risk sensitive liabilities, and if the interest rates are rising, naturally there will be strain on your profitability. So this gap analysis helps you to know where you are, how your profile of assets and liabilities is, and how you can modify or change that profile so that your profitability would not get impacted. Second is the duration gap analysis. What is this duration? Duration is the period within which I can recover my principal with interest at the current rate of interest. If that duration, usually the duration has to be less than the maturity period. So if I am keeping a deposit for 5 years, if the duration has to be less than that 5 years. Now, in addition to the duration, usually banks also calculate modified duration. What is this modified duration? Modified duration, if 1% change in the interest rate is there, what is its impact on the price of my entire investment portfolio? Usually you are aware, when the interest rates go up, then the prices fall down, and when the interest rates go down, prices of your securities go up. So there is an inverse relationship between the price and the interest rates. So the duration, using the duration or the modified duration, again your assets and liabilities are grouped under risk sensitive assets and risk sensitive liabilities, and you decide how the portfolio is sensitive to the interest rates. So duration is rather a sophisticated solution to understand the interest rate risk with which you are confronted, rather than the gap analysis. In simulation, what we do, all the assets and liabilities which are sensitive to changes in the interest rates, those assets and liabilities are mapped such that at various rates of interest, what would be changes in my net interest margins. So there is a simulation, means what if analysis that the banks carry out. If the interest rates go up, then what would be impact on my balance sheet? How my risk sensitive assets and how risk sensitive liabilities would pay me in terms of net interest margin. That is calculated using simulation techniques. In simulation, you are mapping your assets and liabilities at different interest rates. So those are not actual rates of interest, those are the notional rates of interest. You are assuming that in the given future, these rates are likely to increase or likely to decrease. That rise can be, say, 25 basis points, 50 basis points, 100 basis points, and based on that you are creating a kind of a stress on your asset and liabilities and ascertaining at what level you will crash or at what level your profitability would be severely hit and impacted. Fourth measure is value at risk. Now, value at risk is a statistical tool. This statistical tool is used usually for the purposes of ascertaining what is the value of what is the loss, estimated loss I may incur, say in next 1 day, next 7 days, next 1 month, if there is a change in interest rates by 1%. And that here the value at risk means the loss that I am calculating is at 95% confidence level, 99% confidence level, 90% confidence level. What it means? It means that whatever loss I have calculated, it would exceed that amount. For exceeding that that amount, the probability is 5% or 1% or 10%. So, keeping that in mind, that value at risk is also calculated by banks at periodical levels so that they know for certain this much is the loss that I might incur at 5% probability or 1% probability. Last is the long-term measures. Long-term measures, economic value of equity. Now here, value at risk, I am calculating what is the loss that I can have on my portfolio at a given probability. In case of economic value of equity, what I am doing, I am calculating what is the price or what is the value of my assets and liabilities if the interest rates change by 1%. Now, when the interest rates change by 1%, if they increase, naturally the price of your assets declines. So, you are aware that changes in the interest rates impacts the prices of your assets and liabilities. And the difference between the assets and liabilities, the residual value is the capital, is the net worth of the bank. So, to calculate the net worth of the bank, capital of the bank, the real capital of the bank, this economic value of equity formula is used, and there if with 1% change what impact it can have on my equity value is calculated. Now, having talked about the ways and means of measuring the interest rate risk, now we will discuss about the ways in which we can mitigate the interest rate risks. In rising interest rate scenario, these are the options. You can buy interest rate futures and options. Now, similarly, you can sell long-term bonds. When you are selling long-term bonds, since the interest rates are rising, you would be getting the interest rates for a longer period at a higher rate of interest. You can buy floating rate or high yield bonds, and you can buy precious metals. Of course, banks are not permitted, but it is one of the sources through which the risk can be mitigated. And usually it is said that when the interest rates are rising, then in that case the securities of the bonds are falling down, and at that time the equity value, equity shares, their prices go up, and hence usually to guard against the losses, the another option is to invest in equities. Now I would elaborate the liquidity risk. Liquidity risk, in case of liquidity risks, there are two types of liquidity risks. One is a funding liquidity risk and second is market liquidity risk. What is this? As far as funding liquidity risk is concerned, you have to make the funds available to repay the demands of the depositors. As I said in the beginning, the deposits are repayable on demand. So, when there is a demand of the depositors for withdrawal of money, you have to make the funds available. And if you fail to make the funds available, you confront with the funding liquidity risk. So, When this particular situation happens, usually banks are, I will talk first about the normal circumstances in which how this funding liquidity risk has to be tackled or handled by the banks. You are aware that our deposits are repayable on demand, and all the depositors would not come to withdraw the money every day, but at the same time there would always be withdrawal of certain deposits from certain sections of the depositors. Now banks have to do a behavioral analysis of the customers or behavioral analysis of such withdrawals, and based on that they have to decide what is the amount of cash that they should keep in a branch or at a head office. You are aware that banks have this calculation in mind, and hence depending on the size of the business that each branch has, in each of these branches banks usually keep a certain level of cash to meet the withdrawal requests that would come from the customers. Apart from withdrawal of cash, it is also likely that the customers can withdraw cash through check or through other channels as well. And for that purpose, at head office, either with Reserve Bank of India or with other local banks, banks keep their funds so that those funds can be made handily available for meeting those liabilities. But these normal circumstances would, in normal circumstances, normal level of cash or normal level of bank balances will be sufficient for the banks to take care of the liquidity demands. But there are certain situations when these liquidity demands go up. In India, when the festive season starts, naturally there will be more demand for withdrawal. The demand would be not only by way of withdrawal of deposits, but the demand would also be by way of disbursement of loans. So to cater or to meet both the types of demands, you need to arrange for the funds. So banks should usually take note of this factor, and accordingly they should have peak level liquidity demand, slack level liquidity demand, and normal liquidity demand calculations ready, so that they would not be either having excess liquidity or they would not be having a short liquidity, because both the situations are dangerous for the bank. If there is a excess liquidity, it can impact the profitability, and if there is a shortage of liquidity, it can impact the reputation and goodwill of that particular bank for not making the funds available to the customers. So from that perspective, this funding liquidity risk has to be viewed by the banks. Market liquidity risk. Now what is this market liquidity risk? Banks are having investments in government securities, banks are having investments in treasury bills, banks are having investments in commercial papers. They are also holding investments nowadays in debt oriented mutual funds. Now when there is a demand for liquidity, when they want funds either for paying it to the depositors or for disbursing loans, these securities should get converted into cash, and when they should get converted into cash, there should not be loss of interest, loss of income to the bank. This is one factor. And second, most important, those securities should be easily tradable in the market. Tradable means if I am ready to sell those securities, there should be from the other side a demand for securities without any loss to me. And this kind of situation can also happen. Post 2008, banks witnessed this market liquidity risk. Means banks were not in a position to sell the securities, or if they were ready to sell the securities, those securities they had to sell it at a loss. So that is a market liquidity risk. Now how do I measure the liquidity risk? So there are two approaches. One is flow approach and another is stock approach. Now in case of flow approach, you are aware, in case of asset liability management, banks are required to prepare two statements. First statement has to be prepared on a fortnightly basis, and the dynamic liquidity statement, that statement also has to be prepared on a weekly basis. Now what is this structural liquidity statement? Structural liquidity statement gives your total assets and total liabilities which you have mapped into different buckets based on their maturity profile. As and when they are maturing, you are putting it into different buckets. Same is the case with the liabilities. As and when they are falling due for payment, you are putting it into different buckets. So there can be loans, those you are mapping it into different buckets according as per the term installments which are scheduled or which are defined or which are contracted with them. And term deposits are mapped into different buckets based on the residual maturity period that has remained from today, and then based on that I am calculating whether my assets are more than the liabilities in each of these buckets. The first bucket is overnight buckets, means overnight, one day, the deposits which are due next day or the advances which are due next day, and based on that I am calculating in the first bucket what are my total assets and my total liabilities. So next day, what is, if that there is a net, means if the assets are more than the liabilities, it means so much of the amount I have to I have surplus, so that I need not worry for it. But if the assets are less than the liabilities, then in that case you will have to arrange for that particular mismatch so that you will not be confronted with the liquidity. Now usually, keeping these structural liquidity statement in mind, banks identify their assets which can be immediately liquidated and funds can be made available. So which are those immediately liquidated assets? One is the excess SLR, statutory liquidity ratio investments, whatever you are holding in excess of your SLR, those are the assets which can be easily converted into cash. Similarly, your bank deposits, your balances in current accounts with Reserve Bank of India, all these are the assets which you can liquidate it. So now we will move on to, before I move on to stock approach, I will talk about the dynamic liquidity statement. In dynamic liquidity statement, we are giving a projection of the assets and liabilities, means what are the projected uses and what are my projected sources. If my sources are less than the uses, then accordingly I have to make arrangements so that the sources and uses mismatch can be met. This dynamic liquidity statement is of importance, particularly at the end of the quarter or at the end of the year when the uses are more than the sources, and in such situations banks will have to keep their liquid assets handily available so that they can meet the demands of such uses. In stock approach, now here stock approach means what I am doing, I am taking note of certain ratios. These ratios are calculated as of a particular date. It can be month end, it can be quarter end, it can be year end. Now here these ratios help you understand the profile of assets and liabilities that you have from the liquidity perspective, and based on that you can realign your strategies so that liquidity risk can get mitigated. First ratio is volatile liability dependence ratio. To what extent you are dependent on your volatile liabilities. Now what is meant by volatile liabilities and what is meant by temporary investments? In case of volatile liabilities, usually the deposits or the borrowings which are repayable within 1 year are classified into volatile liabilities. So in structural liquidity statement, whatever liabilities you have classified as due within 1 year have to be considered here for the purposes of volatile liabilities. In addition to that, if you have done any intermarket borrowings in the form of call money borrowings or borrowings from Reserve Bank of India, those also have to be classified as volatile liabilities. Temporary investments, here the investments which you can liquidate into cash balances, means excess SLR investments, bank balances, deposits with commercial banks. So these are the deposits which you can very well consider for the purposes of temporary investments. Now what is the acceptable ratio? 40%, means 40% of your temporary investments are funded by your volatile liabilities. If more than 40% liability, if the ratio is more than 40%, there the banks will have to take note of it. You must have seen in many cases few of the banks were indulging in accepting the deposits, short-term deposits, means they were accepting either short-term deposits from the institutions, or they were raising funds by way of floating certificate of deposits. So they were accepting it for a shorter period, say 90 days, 180 days. Since they were floating it for 90 days, 180 days, the rate of interest used to be less, but at the same time they were carrying a high amount of risk. So from that perspective, this ratio has to be taken note of. Growth in core deposits to growth in assets. Now here core deposits means what? Savings deposits, current deposits, they are payable on demand. But you would find that in most of the cases 95% of your deposits continue to remain with you. Only 5% of the deposits, or in certain cases less than 5% of the deposits, are floating in nature, are moving out of it. So the core deposits and their ratio with your rise in assets, that also has to be checked. Third is the purchased funds to total assets, where purchased funds include interbank and other money market borrowings, including certificate of deposits and institutional deposits. Loan losses to net loans. Now if your loan losses are increasing, if NPAs are increasing, now you are aware that in case of certain scheduled commercial banks, this rate has gone up to 16% and in certain cases even up to 20%. So naturally in such cases they would be left with a little liquidity. I will just quickly go through sources of liquidity risk before I conclude my session. Now the liquidity risk increases when there is a change in SLR or CRR. In fact, you have been witnessing that Reserve Bank has been continuously reducing the SLR. The SLR, which used to be 35% during regulated regime, has come down to 19.5%. And as far as CRR is concerned, now it is at 4% for quite a number of years, and it has not been increased at all. So this, as far as from liquidity risk perspective, this particular kind of risk, this particular kind of source is of little interest nowadays. High level of NPAs and poor asset quality. If your asset level start including non-performing assets, if the non-performing assets start mounting, naturally you will be left with a liquidity problem. You will have lesser, your liquidity problems would crop up. Non-recognition of embedded option risk. Now here embedded option risk, nowadays banks have been allowed to put a embedded option in their deposits, wherein they can say that the deposits, when you are keeping the deposits, particularly bulk deposits, your option of claiming before maturity would be withdrawn, because in case of bulk deposits bank offer a higher rate of interest. But if that embedded option is not taken away by the bank, then bank is exposed with a liquidity risk. Reliance on few wholesale depositors. Many a times it so happens that many banks, for the purposes of increasing the balance sheet size, they rely on wholesale depositors who keep large amount of deposits. But these large deposits are interest sensitive, and when the interest rates get reduced, these wholesale depositors, there is a flight of these wholesale deposits, and when there is a flight of these wholesale deposits, liquidity is impacted severely. Banks usually sanction cash credits to their borrowers, and it has been seen that the prime borrowers or blue chip borrowers utilize the cash credit limits as a standby limits. Throughout the year, the limits remain undrawn, and suddenly when there is a good opportunity to utilize those funds, those amounts are withdrawn, and when those amounts are withdrawn, those withdrawals bring strain on liquidity of the banks. In certain cases, it is found that banks have not proper liquidity policy. If you go through the Basel document, what Basel document talks about the liquidity principles is that there should be a oversight of the management, means the board of directors should be well aware of the liquidity risk. Based on their well awareness, the strategies and policies have to be defined by the top management for addressing the liquidity risk. Then only banks can ensure that their profitability is safeguarded, at the same time the reputation is not impacted. So I have few questions based on my session. First question is, how can market risk be curtailed by use of technology? Now I talked about the sources through which you can measure market risk. Now when you are measuring a market risk, you want to have a proper information, you want to have proper data, and hence the MIS system that is in place plays a major role. Apart from MIS system, few of the sources through which you can measure market risks are based on statistical tools, and you can make use of statistical tools only through technology. So if you want to calculate value at risk, if you want to calculate value of your equity, if you want to carry out simulation testing, if you want to carry out a stress testing, all this is possible through a technology. So there are solutions available in the market through which we can make use of such sources for measuring my market risk. Now the question might come that we do not have a huge portfolio which is exposed to market risks, because in market risks most of the times we assume that our investment portfolio is majorly impacted. But you would find that in the last 3 to 4 years our CD ratio is on the decline. CD ratio is hovering around 55% in most of the banks. If CD ratio is so low, what it means, 45% of your funds are deployed in investments. And when you are deploying 45% funds in investments, then that investment cannot be purely from the point of view of meeting SLR requirement, but that investment has also to be for the purposes of generating profit. And when you are generating profit, naturally you are carrying a risk. That market risk you have to continuously watch, measure and mitigate, and hence the sources that I talked about through use of technology play a major role. How can banks sustain themselves with risks associated to macro factors? Now here most important factor in all banks is the back office or mid office operations. Usually in treasury there are 3 segments. One is the front office, second is the mid office, and third is the back office. Now the role of the mid office is to provide information about the changing macroeconomic factors, changing macro-social factors which can have impact on the market risks. Those factors have to be continuously monitored, taken note of, and based on that, our strategies, our policies have to be realigned. On advances front, banks have risk management department. Now that risk management department also has to provide all these inputs so that banks can realign their strategies. Given the size of business of cooperative banks, how should term structure risk be strategized? So here the most important factor that the banks have to bear is they are local in character. When they are local in character, naturally they can succeed and survive if they spread the risks. So as long as the ticket size is small and spread, you would not be confronted with this particular term structure risk even if there is a mismatch, because though you are accepting deposits for 3 years and lending for 15 years in the form of housing loans, since the ticket size is small, the likelihood of failure also would be less and you would be impacted to a little extent. But at the same time, keeping the spirit and guidance of Reserve Bank of India in mind, who have fixed a portfolio of advances for housing loans to your total assets from this perspective only. So if we keep that particular guidance in our mind, we can manage this term structure factor and accordingly manage our market risk. Thank you. Initially, like all other banks, we had branch automation in place. So when we did branch automation, it was automation of the manual processes. But when we migrated from branch automation to core banking solution, there we realized that core banking, here we are not only automating our operations, but we are adopting the best practices and policies which are being followed by other successful banks. And if we have to take advantage of that, we have to revisit our practices and processes, and for that purpose in our bank we carried out a business process re-engineering exercise. In that business process re-engineering exercise, we decided to make branch as a retail outlet providing only services to the customers with a focus on a customer, shifting all the back office operations from the branches to the centralized places. So account opening was one of such activities. KYC, as you are aware, has become so much of importance that KYC non-compliance even at 1% level is punishable by Reserve Bank of India. This particular decision of doing a BPR exercise has helped my bank substantially. Other initiatives in BPR have definitely helped, but this initiative was a most important one.